Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, I'm excited for today's episode. I have a great friend who's been my mentor. You guys have heard me speak of him. Today we're going to talk about a program for wheat. Several of you have asked for it, and we're excited about it. I know that what we're going to talk about today is an option, guys. We're never here to say this is the only way to do this. We're never here to say you're doing it wrong, because that's not the case. We're here to say here's an alternative that has worked for a lot of people, and we'd like you to explore it. I know some of you guys are using 120-foot air drills, and you're using dry granular product when you put it down, and you're wanting to cover those number of acres, and maybe that's what you're say this is what we're going to do. That's cool. We've got other options. Look at everything we have as a smorgasbord. In other words, can I take some things from this and implement it into my operation? And I know one thing in particular I'm going to get very excited about here. We do have one thing that everyone can do later on that makes a big difference in yield, and we're going to talk about that. But today, because of our luck, we are able to have my good friend Denny with us. Denny, welcome, and thanks for taking time out of your day to jump on here and talk about wheat production with us.
More than happy to do this. We've been attempting to put this together for some time, and everyone's very busy live.
That's cool. I appreciate you helping. Denny, let's talk about a wheat production program from start to finish. And for me, that start means soil test. Why do we need to pull that soil test? How's that going to play into what we're going to try and do as we try to get yield at a very reasonable cost here?
We want a roadmap rather than throwing darts at the board with a blindfold. We might hit the target, but we just as soon be closer to center, and also manage our budget at the same time. We constantly have to look at grain prices, available capital, how much we're willing to commit. We look at yield history, and we want to be realistic. We certainly should be striving for more because the genetics is there in the bag or in the box. I was just looking, Rod, at an older presentation I had put together on wheat, and we've got something like 10 or 11 different types of wheat in the United States. I mean, you've got, you get into North Dakota, you'll find a lot of winter wheat, lots of spring wheat up in this part of the country, and then you get the hards and the soft reds and the white wheats and the durum wheats, and there's quite a few different types, but they share some common characteristics. You've got a main stem, and you've got a number of tillers, and not all of the tillers are what we consider yield producing. So we have a program that focuses on getting more out of the main stem yield and more out of especially what are called the T1 and the T2 tillers. The main stem produces about half the yield typically, and the T1 and T2s the other half. So you got to have an understanding a little bit of plant physiology, and you certainly work with that with growers all over the United States with A Better Way to Farm every day, customizing programs. So we can target some of those key things here in our discussion.
Excellent. I appreciate that. You know, we dive right in. One of the things we have is a seed treatment, that L product that we have that goes on. I think the guys are using that at a pound to treat 6,000 pounds of wheat seed. You want to talk about that for a second? Why is that important?
That compound was patented back when by a major university. And interestingly enough, it was developed for cotton. And then, and of course, it works very well there. People sometimes plant cotton 2 or 3 times to get a stand. So many issues. But what we discovered is that it has tremendous widespread impact in grasses or crops that are member what we call gramineae, the gramineae family. Mm-hmm. Some of the broadleaf crops we can use with trial use. You know, you look at sunflower, we've advised people to do trial usage, but that particular crop isn't on the label. But all of the grasses are, and of course, corn, tremendous response. Wheat is a first cousin of corn in the grass family. Energy source that gets right into the germplasm at germination as it imbibes moisture for germination to commence. It's like pouring a little flame on the fires of germination.
Absolutely. I talked to Chris yesterday, and he had was a little bit bummed. He had used that product on his corn, planted about 2 inches deep, and his corn was up in 6 days, and he didn't get the pre-emerge on yet. So it will make it come up out of the ground. You got to know that. Now, after we do that pre-starter, so to speak, let's talk about actually why would we use a starter fertilizer on wheat, and what's your experience with that?
Wheat really likes a little nitrogen boost, but we want to be careful with winter wheat that we're seeding that in the fall as it's going to go through that winter dormancy. We don't want to get too much fuel on the fire, but we do want a reasonable amount there. Phosphorus is the number one key nutrient because that is what impacts the expression of those T1 and T2 tillers. We've got significant data, and even you look at universities like NDSU, North Dakota State University, they taught us that in the mid 90s, Rod. So we like a low salt product that is very soft in the seed environment, neutral pH, because then you have both of the people talk about orthophosphate. There are actually two orthos, and at pH neutral, both of those orthos are equally plant usable. And we load that young seedling up, we'll have really good expression of those T1 and T2s. And remember what I said earlier, that's half the wheat yield on wheat. Now, the other half on the main stem, we'll get back to that nitrogen discussion a little bit as far as top dressing or what we do there, pre-plant nitrogen on spring wheat, and some things we can do to enhance that. One more thing is pay a little bit of attention to early micros, probably not quite as much as what we do on corn, but on that in furrow, if it indicates a little bit of zinc and manganese, that's going to help that germination, early rooting, and early vigor. So those are key. If you're on high organic soils, I'm referring to organic matter, copper can often be limiting and is very significant on the wheats. That's well known, but we want a roadmap. We don't want a shotgun. Don't buy a micro pack that's got everything in it. Throw it out there and think you've done the right thing. Customize and do RX prescription applications. And then the potassium portion of that in-furrow material. We hear people say, golly, I'm on high K soils. I really don't need the K. Well, your soil potassium isn't releasing widely until you have 60 to 80 degree soil temps. It takes even a little longer than phosphorus does. That we learned in a bulletin that was put out by the University of Minnesota just a few years back. And it really surprised a lot of people. Golly, it takes that much warm up to really get things metabolizing. Yes, it does. So a highly available, recoverable K source, which your system provides. And then we typically will bump a little bit of seed-safe sulfur. I believe you're working with the only seed-safe source of that really in the country. There's some products out here, but you don't dare dump them on the seed. But at recommended rates, you can do a little bit with sulfur with what you guys are working with.
Absolutely. I'd like to hear you say that seed-safe sulfur source 4 times real fast, please.
That's like Theophilus thistle, the unsuccessful thistle sifter, right?
There you go. Hey, so with that, D, we're typically, a lot of our guys are using the 81611 too. You know that I am a big fan in corn of 315-19-3 and or 318-18. I like that extra K, especially we're planting in the spring. But I think here, would you agree that we typically gravitate towards that 81611-2 or the 918-9?
Here in Minnesota and on into the Dakotas, the answer is yes. We have typically maybe leaned toward the little higher nitrogen source. We don't maybe need quite as much K, so the 11% you're getting in that 81611 with 2% sulfur it's just really perfect for a cereal.
You know, sometimes when people aren't used to working with us and they think, well, wheat's a small seed, and we're putting this right in the seed trench. This isn't a separate coulter. This isn't a separate trip. This is right in the seed trench. And they go, ooh, I don't know about that. And I think of my good friend Chris down in Oklahoma, who's consistently beating 100 bushel wheat, and he's been using 7 to 9 gallon in furrow. And I tell people, my experience would indicate wheat's pretty hard to kill. It'll take the fertilizer in there. I mean, ours is friendly enough to use in the trench on corn and stuff, but are you worried about seed safety on wheat at all when we're using a 7 or 9 gallon rate?
We worry about seed safety on all crops at all times. This is why we want that roadmap. I mean, if I'm on a light sandy soil, I'm going to pay way more attention to it,
Right.
of course. So start with those guidelines of organic matter and CEC, and you have those you can provide to people. But yeah, we got a little bit more room to play around rate wise than we would on corn. Number basically row spacing and some of that, the dilution is a little different across the wheat runs than it is on, let's say, 30-inch row corn.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of different spacings there. I work with Dave out in Western North Dakota there, and I think he's on eights. We've got a guy that we work with up there in central Minnesota. He's actually got a twin row Kinsey planter, and he's planting his wheat in 15-inch rows and getting great results. But he really loves the fact that he can use his precision placement fertilizer on those 15-inch rows and put 7 to 9 gallon of starter on there, and he is really loving what he's seeing with the results. He's been doing that about 5 years.
When you look at the system equipment wise, and you plug the right product into that, that gives you the ability to give every one of those high price seeds exactly the same amount of plant food. Even if it's an NPKS, there's 4 nutrients right there. Maybe you got 2-3 micros in there. Now we're at 7. The precision of that versus trying to spread that or build a dry bulk blend. Yeah, we can do a lot of things with other fertilizer materials, and they all have a place, and we speak to that. But as far as this precision early boost to really get uniformity and rapid vigor, and of course, don't forget that seed treatment again. You factor those things together. There's probably nothing that'll produce that early vigor any stronger than what you're working with. I mean, that I know of.
No, and I want to come back and hit this thing again. You talked about not using a micro pack, and we do want the soil test. And when they give me a trio, a quadrus, a quintet, an opera, whatever it is, saying they got everything I need in there, I'm real suspicious. We want to make that based on a field by field, and in particular, I think of something like some of these guys are buying a product with iron already in it. Denny, one of the things that you're well aware of, and you've probably tried to teach me a long time before I learned it, but that relationship between iron and manganese, and when we get too much iron, I had a grower call yesterday, he's really upset. His iron levels are off the chart, his manganese is kind of low, and once we get iron that is 2x manganese in the soil, we're going to have a problem getting manganese into that plant. And so using a product with iron in it only exacerbates the problem of no manganese. And yet manganese, as you said, responsible for getting it up out of the ground, really helps with germ. And so we want to make sure we want to make sure we're doing exactly what it calls for, using those micros. Let's go ahead here, Denny. We got it in, we've got it up, it's growing, whether it be fall or spring, and you may want to differentiate here. How much nitrogen are you thinking in the fall? In
Most of the
addition to the
people,
starter, if any?
You've got your starter amount with, let's say, with your 8-16-11 2 blend. So you got that, but you might put another 20 or 30 pounds out there. Some of this is based on what your history is.
Yep.
And we're not going to change that because you probably got that dialed in pretty good. So just be sure you have adequate nitrogen there to get a nice, strong early stand. And let's hope moisture that has good vigor and some good early growth before it goes into that winter dormancy. Now, when it's coming out of dormancy, that's when we're going to do our spring top dressing on a winter wheat cereal crop. And this is where we want a nitrogen sulfur ratio. And for just to make it real easy, people do a lot of different things. But if you can remember 10-1, maybe 12-1, now occasionally you can tighten that down to 8-1 or even a little more, but we are hesitant to do that. We just really like that 10-1, and then get a good stabilizer in with that on that top dress. You will keep the nitrogen in the ammonium form, which is just ideal. Excess nitrates, let's say you're using a fluid like 32%, 28%, That's already 1/4 nitrate. Now that'll get in, but we don't want too much nitrate because then you get this lodging problem.
Yep.
Well known in cereals, especially whether it's oat or barley or anything. I mean, excess nitrates. So the inhibitor, and along with that sulfur, which I've heard some of your other podcasts, you talk about sulfur making the nitrogen work. That's absolutely right. Those are we've got essential amino acids, and all of your amino acids, which are your protein components, contain a nitrogen factor, and 3 of them contain sulfur. So without those components, you don't have the building blocks. And when the plant can do what it wants to do, build, of course, head for yield, grain yield, but build also that quality and that adequate protein level. That's when you max out your genetic potential.
Absolutely. So the next thing that comes along that we get questions on, Denny, is and here's something. If they're using a 120-foot air seeder and they're blowing dry granular down with it, we get that. We can have that discussion on what we can do about that another day. But for those who, no matter what you've done, let's talk about getting to the point where we foliar feed, because we have clients who have had tremendous response. I had a call yesterday from a guy, and he was wanting to talk to me about using a stabilizer that was going to stop volatilization, and he was incorporating urea. And I said, probably don't need to do that if we're going to incorporate it. You were talking about an inhibitor that isn't geared towards stopping volatilization, but is actually talking about stopping the conversion from ammonium into nitrate in, right? So we're talking about a DCD product here with dicyandiamide, correct?
That's correct. As far as volatilization, that may be more of a concern of surface applied nitrogen in states like Texas and Oklahoma, where they've got the heat. I don't worry about that as much up in the northern part of the region. And if you're using a thiosulfate in with that UAN nitrogen solution, like a 120026S or a KTS, now folks need to realize mixing advice is available as far as putting all these things together. ATS, 120026 and UAN mix readily. ATS and KTS, you have a KTS material, potassium thiosulfate. The thiosulfate ion, when it's in surface applied nitrogen, does a very good job for maybe 5 to 7 days in the volatilization area, especially if you apply it in a large droplet size. Now, we learned this from a researcher at NDSU. Good to listen to those guys sometimes, I'll tell you, especially good researcher like RJ Goose, now retired, I believe. But Dr. Goose said if you'll put that nitrogen and sulfur solution out there at a large droplet size, you've really reduced volatilization potential enough that maybe don't need to worry about too much else. And of course, if we're using a stream bar or a stream jet nozzle, we got the large droplet size.
Absolutely. And that's good. So now let me go back. I started down the road of foliar feeding. What do you see as the first window for foliar feeding, and what product are you probably indicating that you would like to see there?
There is potential. You want to stage your crop using, most wheat growers are familiar with a staging system called FEEKS or FEEKS, FEEKES. That's been around for a long time. There are 11 stages in FEEKS, and there's another staging system called ZADOKS, ZADOKS, and that has 100 different stages. That uses a decimal system from 0, germination or birth, to 100 or full maturity, death. That's more precise, but either one of those systems. So if we believe that our early tillering is not quite what we'd like for whatever reason, it can be growing conditions, genetics sometimes. Some varieties are a little more obstinate in expressing those early T1 and T2s. We have taken a cytokinin, now it's a 16-cylinder word, but a cytokinin plant growth regulator that has an EPA label. You access that and work with it. And we've done that at GS1, GS2, and I'm referring to the FEEKS scale. That would be ZADOKS 11 up to 21. We have run 8 ounces of that with one of the plant foods. You could take one of your NPK plant foods to give it a little energy, and that has some real potential in forcing the expression of those early T1, T2s. That is not routinely done, but it's available as an early foliar if warranted. Nobody's really worked with that concept much. You don't hear much about it. But I mean, it's a tool in the toolbox, and if we feel we need to boost that early tillering just a little more, those components will do that. You can do another application out there, maybe around Feeks 5 or 6, but that really should be done based on trial usage. The real money shot is GS8, growth stage 8, flag leaf. That's also Zadox 37. Zadox 37 or Feeks 8, flag leaf. A high percentage of people will put a fungicide on at that point. We spike that with a specially formulated nitrogen boron material that helps the plant metabolize the strobilurin, the fungicide, and maintain its energy. That has produced some significant yield response. But you've got to we're not talking about using 28% nitrogen or 32. It has to be a highly specialized foliar and so that it will not cause injury.
Absolutely. And that's the one that I was saying that basically everybody I think can benefit from. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're not going to go out here and full. If we've had a drought or we've had way too much rain and it's, there comes a time when you just got to say no. However, normal conditions, we've seen tremendous results from people going in there at the flag leaf with this nitrogen boron product. It's great to co-apply, right? Works perfect with the fungicide. Basically built for that.
We built it for that, and we're doing it all the time, and we're doing it on soybeans, even at R3. We're doing it on corn between VT and R2. Follow your labels, of course, but it is a natural fit for use with these modern fungicides. And I don't know of a one where we've seen any antagonism. Naturally, as products get developed and combinations, chemical companies do different things year in and year out. Always take a look at the current label. But rates between 1 and 2 gallons per acre of that nitrogen boron material, that boron is also significant because you're out there aiding in pollen and reproduction. The amount that's in there is good. Occasionally, if we have a plant tissue test prior to GS8, we might spike even a little more boron in. We typically see that on corn as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that one of the many things that makes this appealing is the fact that it goes on at a 2-gallon rate, and a lot of the airplanes and a lot of the drones, when they're flying on that fungicide, they're wanting to only put on. I love the look on an airplane's face when you say, "I'd like you to put on 10 gallon to the acre." Before he tells you no, he gives you this really goofy look like you've lost your mind. And so when we look at this, 2-gallon of this product works perfect, and the drone guys love it too. As we look at that, we've seen very significant results. We're also seeing some boost in protein. And I know some of the guys fight that. Let's talk about that. What are the things that they can do using this system that does make that protein better, that raises that quality?
Protein boost is more of a concern on spring wheat than it is on winter wheat. Most areas where spring wheat is raised, you have to achieve a certain level, and with your, let's say, co-op or who's going to take the grain, or there are potential penalties. Nitrogen and sulfur are going to be the key building blocks of the amino acids that build the protein complex. We've done some very late applications, even out there at GS10, GS10.1, with that high nitrogen foliar material. But we can't say that it's etched in concrete that it's going to effectively boost protein at an economic level every time. But it is worth looking at.
Absolutely. And I will say this, yesterday you and I talked, we had a grower reach out to us. He was already headed out, and we said, let's not do this. That would be, once we get to that heading stage, that's a trial use only. We need to prove that to ourselves, and probably on a winter wheat, That's not going to be something that we're looking to do, because we want to make sure, guys, everything we do has to give us that ROI, right? And so that's what we're after. And the ROI at the GS8 or the flag leaf, guys, that's good. That is rock solid, and we encourage you to do that. We're not talking about investing a big amount of money here, but there are some things we can do. Well, Denny, and we need to wrap this up. Do you have any closing comments for people out here as they're listening to today's episode?
Just remember the main stem and the T1 and the T2 tillers and build a program to enhance those. You will be on your way to maximizing the genetic potential that you purchased in your variety.
Absolutely. Well, Dee, thank you for your time. Guys, we love you tuning in and listening to us. We like to be a little part of your life. Let me say this in closing. I am very happy to announce that Denny and I are going to be working up in North Dakota on July the 10th in the Minot area, and we're going to have a meeting up there. And so if you'd like to come in, we're going to talk about, among other things, we're going to talk about flowers and canola and some things like that, some of the specialty crops, so to speak, that are not corn and soybeans. And if you'd like to get into that meeting, you need to reach out to us. Text Karen the word North Dakota, and she will reach out to you. But we would love to do that. You can text Karen at 641-919-5570. And guys, we look forward to seeing a whole bunch of you up there on the 10th day of July. That being said, thanks for tuning in. We look forward to coming to your house every week. And we appreciate you guys a lot. And we really do hope y'all are having a better day.